Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, a seemingly routine day turned into a nightmare at a boarding school dormitory. As dawn broke, a staff member performing routine rounds made a discovery that would shake the entire community. In the stairwell of the girls' residence, they found the lifeless body of Charnel Howe hanging near the metal railing. But the tragedy did not end there. Within minutes of the initial discovery, responding police found a second victim. Marna Engelbrecht, Charnel's best friend, was also discovered dead under equally distressing circumstances. At first glance, the situation appeared to be an unthinkable double tragedy, a shocking and heartbreaking loss of two young lives. However, as the investigation unfolded, subtle yet troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. Today, we're diving into a true crime case that happened to Charnel Howe, who was born in South Africa in 2002. She grew up in a small, close-knit community where her childhood was surrounded by the love and care of her family. Her upbringing was marked by warmth and encouragement, fostering her naturally curious and vibrant personality. Charnel lived on a sprawling farm in Delville, a quaint and tranquil town nestled in the northwest province of South Africa. The region, known for its scenic savannas and vast shrublands, thrived on agriculture, with most residents depending on farming for their livelihoods. Charnel's father, Ronnie, was a dedicated cattle farmer, managing the family farm with unwavering diligence. Her stepmother, Anna, played a significant role in the household, overseeing daily chores while raising her son, Eston, whom Charnel affectionately regarded as her brother. Despite being part of a blended family, Charnel's relationships with her family members were deeply rooted in mutual respect and care. Charnel's parents had divorced when she was quite young, but the separation was amicable, leaving no room for resentment. Her mother, Sonia, worked at a tourism lodge in a nearby resort area, and Charnel divided her time between her parents' homes before enrolling at Stella boarding school. She would typically spend 3 weeks with her father on the farm, basking in the familiar rhythms of rural life, and 1 week with her mother, immersing herself in the hustle and bustle of the resort town. However, her visits to her mother's home grew less frequent once she started at Stella boarding school. The school, located in a small town far removed from her farm life, represented a significant transition, one that brought newfound independence, but also a sense of disconnection from her earlier routine. It was during this period of adjustment that Charnel experienced an unexpected and joyous reunion with Marna Engelbrecht, her childhood friend. Marna Engelbrecht was also born in South Africa in 2001. She grew up in a supportive and loving family that nurtured her bright and compassionate nature. The two girls had been inseparable during their early years, their bond forged in the innocence of kindergarten and strengthened by the deep ties between their families. Marna's mother, Rionette, had even performed music at Charnel's parents' wedding, a testament to the long-standing connection between the two households. Both families, deeply entrenched in the farming traditions of the Northwest Province, frequently crossed paths at Sunday church services, local community events, and agricultural gatherings. However, life circumstances had pulled the girls apart when Charnel moved, causing their friendship to fade. 8 years later, fate intervened, and the two were brought back together at Stella boarding school. The boarding school environment became a pivotal chapter in Charnel's life. It was a world far removed from the familiarity of the farm, filled with new challenges and opportunities. Her father, Ronnie, remained consumed by the demands of managing the farm, while her mother's distant residence meant she could no longer be a constant presence in Charnel's daily life. In this context, Marna's friendship became an indispensable source of support and comfort for Charnel. The two shared a dorm room and spent most of their free time together, rekindling their bond over shared interests and memories. Charnel's charisma and Marna's intelligence complemented each other perfectly, and they quickly became known as an inseparable duo within the school community. Charnel's days were filled with horseback riding and her growing passion for photography, a hobby she nurtured with dreams of turning it into a career. Her father, however, saw her potential in a different light, frequently encouraging her to consider modeling. Marna, on the other hand, was a diligent student with a natural aptitude for math and science. Inspired by her experiences on her family's farm, She harbored aspirations of becoming a veterinarian. Her nickname, Marna Thinker, given by her father Stefan, reflected her calm, thoughtful nature. Stefan, a respected drilling specialist, shared a close bond with his younger daughter, often marveling at her insights. Marna's mother, Renette, worked as a compassionate caregiver, while her older sister, Rion, played a significant role in maintaining the family's harmony. The Engelbrecht family was well regarded in the community for their warmth and close-knit relationships. The Stella School's close-knit environment provided the perfect backdrop for Charnel and Marna to rekindle their friendship. Their shared love for animals and the outdoors often led to adventures on horseback, where they would explore the vast landscapes surrounding the school and their homes. In March 2017, Charnel's world took an unexpected turn when she first noticed Xander, a striking 18-year-old who had graduated from Stella boarding school the previous year. With his athletic build, thick dark hair, and piercing green eyes, Xander exuded confidence and charm, making him an enigmatic figure in the small town. Although Charnel was still a student, Xander's frequent visits to the school and its surrounding areas kept him connected to the local community. His family's history was as complex as it was intriguing. His parents, Monty and Mersha, had divorced during his early childhood, leading him to grow up primarily on his father's farm, located about 50 miles from Stella. While Xander maintained a cordial relationship with his mother, their bond was less close compared to his relationship with his father. Before Xander's arrival in Charnel's life, her days at Stella boarding school were marked by the shared interests and dreams she nurtured with Marna. Together, they envisioned futures that intertwined their passions with their rural upbringing. On weekends, they often returned to their respective homes but occasionally stayed with each other's families. Ronnie, Charnel's father, treated Marna as if she were his own daughter, and both families shared warm and supportive ties. On the surface, their lives appeared idyllic, filled with laughter, companionship, and dreams for the future. However, beneath this facade of happiness, a complex and darker reality lurked, threatening to upend their worlds. Xander, who had recently entered Charnel's life, was a young man carrying the heavy weight of a troubled past. His outward confidence and charm masked a childhood marked by the emotional fallout of his parents' divorce and the challenges that followed. Xander's mother, Mersha, viewed him as a miracle child. After enduring years of heartbreak and multiple struggles to conceive, she finally gave birth to Xander following a difficult pregnancy fraught with complications. His early health challenges only deepened Mersha's love and devotion, making her a fiercely protective and doting mother. Her protective nature remained strong even as Xander grew older, influencing his perception of relationships and boundaries. In stark contrast to his mother's nurturing approach, Xander's father, Monty, a stern and disciplined former police officer, raised him with a tough love philosophy. From a young age, Monty introduced Xander to sports, hunting, and outdoor activities, emphasizing self-reliance and physical toughness. Fishing trips, shooting practice, and treks into the forest became staples of their father-son bond. Xander excelled in sports, particularly rugby, where his athletic prowess shone, but his fiery temper and combative personality often overshadowed his achievements. He frequently clashed with teachers, classmates, and even adults, earning a reputation for his unpredictable and confrontational nature. School meetings to address his behavior became routine, with Mersha unwaveringly defending her son, insisting that his actions were simply expressions of individuality. After graduating from high school, Xander chose not to pursue further education, opting instead to assist his father on the family farm. His social media presence was sparse, limited mainly to posts showcasing firearms, hunting trophies, and outdoor escapades, painting a picture of a private yet rugged individual. Despite his low-profile lifestyle, Xander's natural charisma and striking good looks drew attention, particularly from young women who found his enigmatic persona alluring. It was at a school event that Charnel first encountered Xander. Alumni, including Xander, were invited to interact with current students and share their experiences. Their initial meeting was brief but charged with mutual intrigue. Xander's confidence, athletic build, and captivating charm left a lasting impression on Charnel. Soon after, they began spending time together, and their relationship blossomed at a rapid pace. In the early days, Xander was attentive and affectionate, going out of his way to make Charnel feel special and valued. His gestures of devotion, though overwhelming at times, were interpreted by Charnel as signs of his deep love for her. When the time came for Xander to meet Charnel's family, he approached the occasion with eagerness and determination to impress. Ronnie, initially wary of the young man's intentions, soon found common ground with Xander over their shared interest in farming. Xander's willingness to help out on the farm, combined with his polite demeanor, gradually won Ronnie's approval. These early interactions painted a picture of harmony and compatibility, but beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, warning signs about Xander's temperament began to emerge. Marna, Charnel's closest friend, was the first to notice subtle changes in her friend's behavior. The once inseparable pair now seemed to drift apart. Charnel, who had always been open and engaging, began to withdraw, frequently avoiding conversations and making excuses to skip their usual outings. At first, Marna attributed these changes to the excitement and demands of a new relationship, but as time passed, the distance grew more pronounced. Charnel's excuses for her absence often revolved around being too busy or too tired, explanations that rang hollow to Marna, who suspected a deeper issue. It became increasingly evident that these changes were linked to Xander's growing presence in Charnel's life. Initially, Xander's control manifested subtly. He would casually inquire about Charnel's plans, ask who she was spending time with, and show an intense interest in her daily activities. However, over time, his demands escalated. Xander began insisting on access to Charnel's phone, social media accounts, and personal messages, framing his requests as a need for transparency and trust in their relationship. Unaware of the underlying possessiveness, Charnel complied, believing his jealousy was a reflection of his strong feelings for her. The situation came to a head during preparations for prom, a milestone event that should have been filled with excitement and joy. Charnel, accompanied by her mother Sonia, embarked on a shopping trip to find the perfect dress. However, the lighthearted outing quickly turned tense when Xander inserted himself into the process. He insisted on approving her choice of dress and dictated specific details about her appearance, such as wearing minimal makeup and styling her hair in a manner he deemed acceptable. Although Charnel yearned to assert herself, she ultimately acquiesced to his demands, fearing the conflict that would ensue if she resisted. Later, she confided in a few close friends about feeling uneasy with his behavior, but still didn't fully comprehend the growing gravity of the situation. Xander's controlling tendencies did not stop there. They continued to escalate over time. His interference in her friendships became more overt and hostile. He openly expressed disdain for anyone he deemed a bad influence, creating an atmosphere of tension and fear. If Charnel spent time with friends, he demanded detailed explanations about where she went, who she was with, and what they discussed. These incessant inquiries wore her down, and she gradually started to avoid social interactions altogether to minimize arguments. Even her bond with Marna, her closest and most trusted friend, began to suffer. Their once frequent meetings became rare, and when Marna tried to confront Charnel about Xander's behavior, Charnel dismissed her concerns, rationalizing his actions as part of his personality. She convinced herself and others that these challenges were temporary and that Xander would eventually change. However, instead of improving, his control grew more oppressive, and his behavior became alarmingly aggressive. Even during family dinners with Xander's relatives, Charnel noticed how closely he monitored her words and actions. Initially, her family, including her father, Ronnie, and stepmother Anna, had approved of the relationship, perceiving Xander as polite and hardworking. However, as months passed, they began to see subtle but troubling changes in Charnel's demeanor. Once confident, she appeared increasingly withdrawn and subdued. Ronnie and Anna attributed these changes to academic stress, unaware of the deeper issue at play. Only Marna recognized the warning signs and attempted to reach out, but Xander's influence had already created a wall of isolation around Charnel. By January 2018, Charnel Hauff had reached her breaking point. After enduring months of Xander's controlling and aggressive behavior, she decided to end the relationship. This decision had been building over time, fueled by a growing awareness of how unhealthy and damaging his actions were. By the end of the previous year, her family and friends had noticed the toll the relationship was taking on her. Xander's constant monitoring of her phone and social media, as well as the heated arguments that often escalated into physical confrontations, had raised alarm among those close to her. Occasionally, bruises or marks would appear on Charnel's body after these altercations, prompting concern from her best friend Marna, who implored her to leave him. The final straw came when Charnel realized that staying in the relationship would only further erode her sense of self. The breakup triggered an extreme and alarming reaction from Xander. He began bombarding Charnel with messages, threatening to harm himself and claiming he couldn't live without her. These emotionally manipulative tactics were designed to make her reconsider her decision. Despite the immense stress this caused, Charnel remained resolute. For the first time, she stood firm in her decision, determined to leave the toxic relationship behind. During this tumultuous period, Marna became entangled in the conflict. Xander accused her of turning Charnel against him and began sending her a series of insulting and threatening messages. Alarmed by the escalation, Marna confided in her father, Stefan, who immediately took action. Stefan confronted Xander directly, demanding that he cease his harassment of Marna. While this intervention temporarily de-escalated the situation, Xander's hostility didn't disappear entirely. His anger simmered beneath the surface, creating an ever-present sense of unease. A few months after the breakup, Charnel found solace in an old friend, Brandon Victor. She had known Brandon since she was 14, and their friendship had always been marked by mutual respect and kindness. Brandon, a high school senior with an excellent reputation, was known for his athletic accomplishments and compassionate nature. He became a source of emotional support for Charnel during this challenging time. Brandon listened to her concerns, offered encouragement, and helped her rebuild her confidence after the trauma of her relationship with Xander. Over time, their friendship deepened into a closer bond, and they began to develop feelings for one another. Aware of Xander's lingering obsession with Charnel, they decided to keep their relationship private to avoid provoking him further. May 2018 marked a turning point in the unfolding tragedy surrounding Charnel Hauf. Despite her best efforts to reclaim her peace of mind and move forward, she could not escape the oppressive shadow of Xander's persistent interference. His refusal to accept the end of their relationship and his ongoing attempts to insert himself into her life created a tense and increasingly volatile atmosphere. The mounting pressure began to take a toll not only on Charnel, but also on those closest to her, setting the stage for a series of events that would change everything. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, an eerie and unnatural stillness permeated the corridors of the boarding school dormitory. Christelle, one of the dormitory caretakers, began her routine rounds at approximately 6 a.m., moving through the quiet hallways to ensure students were awake. As she neared the restroom, something unusual caught her attention. Dark strands of hair scattered on the floor. At first, she dismissed the sight, assuming it was leftover hair from brushing or a harmless prank. However, as she made her way toward the staircase leading to the ground floor, a more disturbing scene began to unfold. There, tied tightly across the railing, was a green nylon rope. Moments later, dormitory caretaker world froze as she looked up and saw a pair of feet clad in white socks dangling above the floor. Unbeknownst to Christelle, dormitory caretaker, a chain of chilling events had already been set in motion hours earlier. At approximately 4:17 a.m., Sonia, Charnel's mother, was abruptly awakened at her home by the chime of her phone. The message on her screen was brief but deeply unsettling. "Mom, I just wanted to say I love you and I'm sorry." What struck Sonia most was the misspelling of the word sorry, as Charnel had always been meticulous about her grammar. Alarm bells rang in Sonia's mind. She immediately tried calling her daughter, but the call went straight to voicemail. Overcome with worry, Sonia reached out to Ronnie, her ex-husband, to ask if he had heard from Charnel. Groggy from being awakened, Ronnie reassured her that everything had seemed normal the night before. However, he decided to check his phone for any missed messages. His heart sank as he found two unsettling texts from Charnel. The first, sent at 3:42 a.m., included a photo of Charnel in her undergarments with the caption, "I love you, Brandon." The second, sent at 4:17 a.m., read, "Dad, I'm sorry. Marna and I are leaving." The cryptic and ominous nature of the messages filled Ronnie with dread. At the same time, Christelle, dormitory caretaker piecing together the gravity of what she had seen, hurried upstairs to Charnel and Marna's shared dormitory room. To her shock, the room was eerily tidy, with the girls' belongings neatly arranged, as though they had been preparing for a regular day. There were no signs of a struggle or distress, but the absence of the girls confirmed Christelle's worst fears. Realizing the situation was far more dire than she had initially thought, she returned to the staircase where the horrifying sight of the rope still loomed. Meanwhile, Charnel's troubling messages were beginning to reach others. Brandon, her boyfriend, received a late-night text that left him confused and alarmed. His immediate attempts to call her went unanswered. Though unsure of what was happening, Brandon felt an intense foreboding, as if something terrible was about to unfold. What should have been a routine morning filled with preparations for a rugby match quickly descended into chaos. Early that same morning, head teacher Richard Hobson received a frantic phone call from Christelle, dormitory caretaker. Her voice trembled with panic as she described finding Charnel's lifeless body hanging from the staircase railing in the dormitory building. Stunned and struggling to process the information, Hobson tried to gather more details, but the call abruptly ended as Christelle dropped the phone and ran to find additional help. As news of the tragedy began to filter out, Ronnie received a devastating call from the principal. The message was brief but heartbreaking. Both Charnel and her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht, had been found dead. Overwhelmed with grief and desperate for clarity, Ronnie immediately contacted his brother Louis to accompany him to the school. As they drove toward the school, Ronnie's mind raced with the strange, cryptic late-night messages he had received from his daughter. His heart was heavy with dread, unable to reconcile the words on his phone with the horrifying events now unfolding. Beside him, Louis remained silent, his own expression grim as they braced themselves for the unknown. At the school, chaos reigned despite the valiant efforts of Principal Hobson and his staff to shield the students from the unfolding nightmare. Whispers of tragedy spread like wildfire, the weight of the situation impossible to contain. Attempts to maintain a semblance of normalcy crumbled as grim reality took hold. By the time the police arrived later that morning, the scene had taken an even darker turn. What they initially believed to be a single devastating loss revealed itself to be far more harrowing. Marna's lifeless body was discovered in the first-floor bathroom, her neck encircled by a strap from a school backpack. Early police assumptions leaned toward the possibility of a tragic suicide pact between the two girls. But as investigators meticulously examined the scene, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The markings on the girls' necks didn't align with typical indicators of self-inflicted harm. The positions of the bodies, the materials used, and the lack of any suicide notes, elements often present in such cases, raised more questions than answers. The growing evidence hinted at a sinister undercurrent, and suspicions of foul play steadily gained traction. Ronnie arrived at the school shortly after the police, his already fragile composure crumbling as he caught sight of his daughter's lifeless form. Ignoring the warnings of officers who urged him not to disturb the scene, Ronnie pushed past them, his grief transforming into desperate denial. He reached for Charnel, overcome by an instinctive need to protect her, even in death. It took the combined efforts of Louis and several officers to prevent Ronnie from collapsing entirely. Meanwhile, Marna's father, Stevens, arrived and was consumed by a volatile mix of rage and sorrow. Upon learning of his daughter's fate, his anguish quickly turned to suspicion, and he didn't hesitate to openly accuse Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, of involvement in the tragedy. As tensions escalated, Principal Hobson recognized the need for swift and decisive action. Turning to someone he trusted, he contacted Chris Sanders, a seasoned private investigator renowned for his meticulous and methodical approach to solving complex cases. Sanders arrived within hours, his reputation preceding him as he stepped into the chaotic scene. His first move was to interview Brandon Victor, Charnel's current boyfriend, who had been visibly shaken by the news. Brandon disclosed that Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, had remained fixated on her, often making veiled threats and attempting to interfere in her life after their breakup. This revelation added weight to the growing suspicion surrounding Xander. Meanwhile, the investigation at the crime scene continued to uncover critical pieces of evidence. The green nylon rope used on the staircase and the backpack strap around Marna's neck were carefully collected, each item meticulously bagged and sent for forensic analysis. Fingerprints and DNA samples became the linchpin of the investigation as the team sought to reconstruct the events leading up to the tragedy. Xander's name repeatedly surfaced during interviews with students and staff, painting him as a figure who could no longer be ignored. While the police worked tirelessly to gather evidence, the emotional toll on the families became increasingly evident. Stevens, Marna's father, grew frustrated with the pace of the investigation. Consumed by his need for answers, he decided to confront Xander directly. Driving to Xander's home in a fit of rage, Stevens demanded the truth. The confrontation quickly escalated into a volatile altercation. Xander's father, Monty, attempted to mediate, but the heated exchange spiraled further out of control until Chris Sanders arrived on the scene. His presence, calm yet authoritative, diffused the situation before it could erupt into violence. As Sanders delved deeper into the events of May 25, 2018, the timeline began to crystallize. Around midnight, Charnel, Marna, and Brandon had gathered in the girls' dormitory room. Despite the school's strict rules, Brandon had managed to sneak in, eager to spend time with Charnel. The three of them had spent hours talking, sharing laughs, and discussing their plans for the future. But as the night wore on, a subtle tension seemed to creep into the room. Around 2 a.m., Brandon reluctantly left, blissfully unaware that it would be the last time he saw either girl alive. By the following morning, the tragic news had spread across the school and the wider community, leaving Brandon devastated. Racked with guilt, he replayed the night's events over and over in his mind, questioning if there had been any signs he had missed, anything he could have done differently to prevent this outcome. Meanwhile, Stephen's confrontation with Xander further escalated the already volatile situation. Xander denied any involvement, but his defensive and erratic behavior only deepened suspicions. Displaying a calm yet authoritative demeanor, Chris Sanders managed to de-escalate the heated confrontation between Stevens and Xander. With careful negotiation, Sanders convinced Stevens to step back and persuaded Xander to accompany him voluntarily to the police station. Despite Xander's initial resistance, Sanders' composed yet firm approach left little room for argument. On the drive to the station, Sanders began subtly probing Xander, employing a methodical questioning technique designed to apply steady psychological pressure. Xander, unable to maintain his composure under Sanders' relentless yet composed questioning, eventually broke down and confessed to the crimes. In a shocking admission, Xander revealed that he had murdered Charnel out of jealousy and rage, unable to accept her moving on with Brandon. Marna, he admitted, had been killed because she was a witness to his actions and might have exposed him. Sanders, always prepared, recorded the confession using a discreet voice recorder to ensure the evidence was preserved. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, police investigators meticulously combed the area for evidence. The physical marks on the girls' bodies and the positioning of the crime scene contradicted the initial theory of voluntary acts, aligning instead with foul play. Xander's confession confirmed these suspicions, providing investigators with crucial details that painted a clear and harrowing picture of his premeditated actions. Once they arrived at the station, Xander's confession continued under formal questioning. He chillingly detailed how he had planned the crimes, intending to make them appear as voluntary acts to avoid suspicion. He described sneaking into the dormitory under the cover of darkness and executing his plan with calculated precision. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered disturbing evidence of Xander's obsessive behavior. His phone contained hundreds of messages, photos, and journal entries centered on Charnel, many of which displayed an unhealthy fixation. These records painted a disturbing portrait of a man consumed by jealousy and unable to accept rejection. The case reached its climactic moment during Xander's trial in March 2019. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution presented a meticulously constructed narrative of the events leading up to the murders. One of the most impactful testimonies came from Anastasia Fesser, an acquaintance of Xander's from fishing competitions. Anastasia recounted a phone call she had received from Xander the day before the tragedy. During the conversation, Xander angrily declared that he would not let Charnel live her life without him. His chilling words, a direct warning of his intentions, were etched into Anastasia's memory. At the time, she had dismissed his statement as an emotional outburst, never imagining the catastrophic outcome that would follow. Her testimony became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, highlighting the premeditated nature of Xander's actions and his obsessive state of mind. Another pivotal moment came when Brandon Victor, Charnel's new boyfriend, took the stand. Brandon recounted the events of May 24, 2018, the night before the tragedy. Despite strict school rules, he had sneaked into the girls' dormitory to comfort Charnel, who was visibly distressed by the escalating threats from Xander. Brandon described how they had spent the evening talking, laughing, and trying to alleviate the tension. However, their moment of solace was interrupted by a phone call from Xander. Charnel, trying to remain composed, answered the call on speaker so that Brandon and Marna could hear. Xander's tone shifted from pleading to menacing, ending with a chilling threat. "You'll regret what I'm going to do tonight." Charnel was shaken but insisted that Brandon leave to avoid punishment if his presence was discovered. This marked the last time Brandon saw Charnel and Marna alive. The defense's attempts to challenge the validity of the evidence were systematically dismantled. They argued that Xander's confession had been coerced, but the testimony of private investigator Sanders, coupled with the recorded statements, rendered this claim baseless. Psychological evaluations presented during the trial described Xander as emotionally unstable, with a pathological fixation on Charnel. Experts testified that his inability to cope with rejection, combined with his obsessive need for control, had driven him to commit the heinous acts. The role of Xander's family came under scrutiny during the trial. His mother, known for her overprotective nature, had consistently dismissed signs of concerning behavior throughout his upbringing. While Xander's father, Monty, initially acknowledged his son's guilt and called for justice, his stance shifted dramatically after the sentencing. Xander Bilesma was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, a verdict that Monty later labeled as unjust. In an unexpected move, Monty hired a team of lawyers to appeal the conviction. For the families of Charnel and Marna, the trial's conclusion brought a mix of emotions. While the conviction provided a measure of justice, it could not erase the pain of their loss. In a poignant act of solidarity, Charnel and Marna, inseparable in life, were laid to rest beside each other.